Quay devoted 3 days to laying the dead to rest. 17 individuals from his village were lost. A dozen more perished during the attack. He dug their graves in the crimson earth near the baobab trees, where village elders once convened. His hands were raw and bleeding, yet he persevered. On the 4th day, he made his way to the mangrove swamps. He required timber, resilient timber, the sort that could endure a voyage across an ocean. He selected African mahogany and mangrove roots. Using an axe he had forged with his own hands years prior, he felled the trees. With every swing, he was reminded of his purpose. On the 5th day, his friend Yor discovered him. Yor's village had been overlooked by the slave raiders. He observed the labor for an hour before uttering a word. "You're constructing a vessel," Yor observed. Quay responded with a nod. "To traverse the sea." Another nod followed. "Such a journey would be your demise." Quay persisted in his cutting. "Perhaps, but I would rather perish attempting to retrieve them. That is preferable to wasting away here, inactive." Yor assisted him in transporting the timber back to the shore. Additional survivors from the village joined their efforts. They considered Quay insane, yet they comprehended his motivation. Any one of them would have harbored the same desire, had they possessed his bravery or his fury. Prior to continuing this remarkable narrative, please remember to subscribe to our channel and indicate in the comments which city you are viewing from. Thank you. And let's proceed. The vessel required 3 weeks to complete. It measured 15 feet in length, was slender, and featured a single sail stitched together from old fishing nets. It lacked beauty. It wasn't even particularly seaworthy. However, it would likely remain afloat. Quay loaded it with all the provisions he could manage: clay vessels for gathering rain, dried fish, preserved meat, a blade, and cordage. He secured a wooden container in the vessel's center. Inside this container rested a small illustration his daughter Adua had created, depicting their family holding hands as stick figures. He had discovered it amidst the debris of their dwelling. It was the sole item to survive the conflagration. Yor stood upon the shore the morning Quay departed. "The ocean spans 4,000 miles, he stated. "You lack charts. You possess no directional instrument. Your destination is unknown." Quay propelled the vessel toward the water. Westward, the ship journeyed west. "That is the location of America." Yor shook his head in disbelief. "You will succumb to starvation." Quay climbed into the boat. "I will catch fish." The waves began to lap against the hull. "You will become disoriented." He hoisted the sail. "I will navigate by the sun." Yor grasped the boat's side one final time. "You will perish in isolation upon the vast ocean, and your fate will remain forever unknown." Quay gazed upon his companion. His eyes remained dry. His tears had already been exhausted. "Then I will perish with the knowledge that I made the attempt." "Release the boat, Yor." Yor relinquished his hold. The wind filled the sail, and the vessel drifted away from the land. Quay did not turn back. To look back would be to risk altering his decision. To alter his decision would be to incur unforgivable self-reproach. The initial week proved most arduous. Quay had been a fisherman his entire existence, yet he had never ventured beyond sight of the coast. On the 3rd day, the African shoreline vanished behind him. Nothing but water stretched in every direction. Azure sky above, deeper azure water below. The horizon formed a perfect ring. He occupied its nucleus, utterly solitary. He navigated westward by observing the sun's position. Mornings found him with the sun at his back. At midday, he altered his sail to maintain his westward course. Evening saw him sailing toward the setting sun. Nighttime navigation relied upon the stars. His father had instructed him in the constellations during his youth. He identified those indicating west and followed their guidance. Provisions were exhausted after 12 days. The dried fish was consumed first, followed by the smoked meat. He attempted to conserve supplies, yet his energy expenditure was significant, battling the sail and removing accumulated water. The vessel leaked, not severely, but sufficiently to necessitate bailing every few hours. Blisters developed on his hands, which subsequently ruptured and became infected. He wrapped them in fabric strips torn from his garment. He captured his initial fish on day 14, a modest tuna. He dispatched it with his blade and consumed it uncooked. The flavor induced retching, but he compelled himself to swallow. Protein was essential. Strength was essential. He preserved the innards for bait and caught 3 additional fish during the subsequent week. This was insufficient nourishment, yet it sustained his existence. Water scarcity proved more critical than food shortage. Rainfall was inconsistent. Sometimes precipitation continued for hours, other times, days passed without a drop. He collected every possible droplet in his clay receptacles. When these containers were empty, he resorted to consuming seawater. He recognized the peril. Seawater induces madness and dehydration. However, sometimes it was seawater or nothing. He chose seawater. On day 19, he observed a vessel in the distance, merely a speck upon the horizon, yet he discerned its sails. His heart leaped. He rose within his boat, waving his arms and shouting. The vessel maintained its course, remaining too distant. Either they failed to perceive him, or they perceived him and remained indifferent. A solitary African man in a diminutive boat did not warrant interruption. He observed the vessel's disappearance, then seated himself. He had progressed beyond tears. He retrieved his fishing line and resumed his labor. Hallucinations commenced on day 23. He perceived his Dawnary Ndua seated at the boat's front, smiling, attired in the yellow dress his wife had created for her 6th birthday. "Papa," she said, "I am thirsty." He attempted to offer her water, but upon reaching for her she dissolved. He blinked, and solitude returned. Only himself and the ocean. The hallucinations intensified. He perceived his wife Amma standing upon the water's surface, approaching him. Her feet remained dry. She progressed as upon solid terrain. "Return home," she urged. "You will perish out here." He recognized her unreality, acknowledged it as his mind's deception. Yet her appearance was so convincing. He could discern the scar upon her left hand from a yam preparation accident. He could observe the curl of hair near her temples. "I cannot return home," he informed the apparition. "You are absent. You reside in America. I am journeying to locate you." The hallucination of Amma shook her head. "You pursue phantoms. We are already deceased." Quay closed his eyes. Upon reopening them, she had vanished. A tempest assailed him on day 28. He observed its approach from afar. A dark wall of clouds advancing across the water. He had endured storms previously, but never in such a diminutive vessel, never at such distance from land. He lowered the sail and secured everything, then waited. The storm persisted for 6 hours. Waves reached 15 feet in height. His boat ascended one side, balanced momentarily upon the crest, then plummeted down the opposing side. Water flooded over the edges. He bailed incessantly, scooping water with his hands, his pots, any available implement. The wind shrieked. Rain struck his face like needles. Lightning split the sky in proximity sufficient to detect ozone. He anticipated his demise. The boat capsized twice. On both occasions, he managed to right it prior to complete submersion. His cordage snapped. His sail tore. The wooden container containing his daughter's illustration became loose and slid toward the boat's edge. He seized it moments before a wave could claim it, clutching it against his chest as the tempest endeavored to destroy him. When the storm finally subsided, Quay found himself lying in the boat's bottom amidst 4 inches of water. Everything ached. His ribs felt fractured. His hands were again bleeding. Yet he survived. The boat remained afloat. The container with the illustration was secure. He sat up slowly. The sky had cleared, the sun emerged. He possessed no knowledge of whether he still traveled west. The storm had spun him repeatedly, destroying his bearings. He consulted the sun. It was afternoon. He adjusted his tattered sail and resumed movement. On day 31, he observed birds, pelicans, substantial brown creatures with enormous beaks. They flew eastward, indicating their origin in the west, which signified land to the west. His heart accelerated. He had succeeded. America was near. 2 days subsequently, he perceived land. A slender green line on the horizon, trees, beach, solid ground. He had traversed the Atlantic Ocean. He 500 miles in a 15-foot vessel without compass, charts, or genuine strategy. He had accomplished what all deemed impossible. He landed upon a beach in South Carolina. He remained unaware of its specific location. His sole knowledge was that his boat contacted sand, and he could cease sailing. He disembarked and collapsed upon the shore. His legs failed to function. He had maintained the same posture for 33 days. His musculature had forgotten ambulation. He lay there for an hour, perhaps longer. The sun warmed his back. The sand was comfortable. He perceived waves breaking and birdsong. After a month of exclusively oceanic sounds, ordinary noises seemed peculiar. When he finally rose, he perceived them, 3 men approaching along the beach. They were black, free black men, he subsequently realized. They halted approximately 20 feet distant and stared. He must have appeared dreadful, emaciated, sunburned, skin peeling from face and arms, garments in tatters. One of the men uttered something in English. Kwai failed to comprehend. He spoke Susu, his people's language. These men spoke English. They regarded one another. He attempted explanation through gestures. He indicated his boat. He pointed westward, back toward Africa. He simulated a sailing vessel's motion. He indicated himself, then simulated chains encircling his wrists. The men's expressions transformed. They comprehended this man originated from Africa. This man sought enslaved individuals. This man had crossed the ocean. One of the men, older with gray hair, advanced. He spoke deliberately, employing simple words and gestures. "You from Africa?" He pointed eastward. Kwai nodded. "You looking family?" He simulated holding a child. Kwai nodded again, more urgently. The elderly man's expression was sorrowful. "Many slaves here, sold plantations." He gestured inland. "Charleston." He pointed north along the coast. "Ships come every week. Africa to Charleston. Slaves sold sent south. Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia." Kwai comprehended perhaps 1 word in 3, yet grasped the message. His family had been transported here. They had been sold. They could be anywhere. The elderly man, whose name was Samuel, guided him to a modest settlement of free black individuals approximately 1 mile inland. Perhaps 20 families resided there. They provided sustenance, genuine nourishment, cornbread, beans, pork. He consumed slowly. His stomach had contracted. Excessive food rapidly would induce illness. They supplied water, clean water from a well. He drank until his stomach protested. They offered sleeping accommodation, an actual bed with a blanket. He reclined and closed his eyes. For the first time in 33 days, he was not in a boat. He was not surrounded by water. He was upon land. He was in America. He had accomplished the impossible portion. Now commenced the more challenging phase, locating his family within a nation of 4 million enslaved individuals, distributed across 1,000 miles of plantations, farms, and urban centers. Samuel sat with him that evening. Samuel spoke deliberately, employing gestures to facilitate comprehension. Kwai was beginning to understand some English words. Wife signified Amma. Children signified Kofi and Adua. Sold indicated their removal somewhere. Plantation denoted the agricultural establishments where enslaved individuals labored. Samuel explained that vessels from Africa typically landed at Charleston. Enslaved individuals were vended at markets. Some remained in South Carolina. Most were sold southward to larger plantations in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Cotton plantations, sugar plantations, locations requiring hundreds of workers. Samuel inquired when Quay's family had been taken. Quay displayed 3 fingers, then indicated the moon. 3 moons previously. 3 months. Samuel's expression fell. 3 months. They could be anywhere. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, sold multiple times. Quay remained unconcerned. 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades. It was irrelevant. He would search until he located them or until death terminated his efforts. Samuel introduced him to other community members. There was a woman named Ruth who had been enslaved on a plantation near Charleston. She had escaped 5 years previously. She understood systemic operations. She explained that slave vessels maintained records, names, ages, African origins, American sale locations. These records were preserved in Charleston at the slave markets. If Quay wished to locate his family, he needed access to those records. However, an obstacle existed. The records were maintained by white men operating the slave markets. They would not simply surrender them to an African man incapable of English. Quay would require assistance. Someone literate, someone capable of interacting with white individuals without arousing suspicion, someone knowledgeable about systemic operations. Ruth knew such a person, a free black man named Marcus, who worked as a carpenter in Charleston. Marcus possessed literacy, taught using a Bible he had stolen from his former master. Marcus occasionally performed work at the slave markets, constructing pens and auction blocks. He had access. He could examine the records. Samuel and Ruth escorted Quay to Charleston. It was the first city he had ever witnessed. Buildings 3 stories tall, cobblestone thoroughfares, carriages, hundreds of people. The noise was overwhelming, people shouting, horses, church bells. It smelled of smoke, sewage, and salt water. They located Marcus in a workshop near the docks. Marcus was a substantial man, exceeding 6 feet in height, with carpenter's hands scarred from years of labor. Samuel explained the situation. Marcus regarded Quay for an extended period. "You crossed the ocean," Marcus said. "In that little boat I saw on the beach." Quay nodded. Marcus slowly shook his head. "That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the craziest. Perhaps both." Marcus consented to assist. However, he cautioned Quay. "If your family passed through Charleston 3 months ago, they are long departed. Probably sold to some plantation in the deep South. Alabama, Mississippi. Those are terrible places. Genuinely terrible. Worse than here. You go searching for them, you might become enslaved yourself or dead." Quay remained indifferent to danger. He had crossed an ocean. He had survived tempests, starvation, and hallucinations. He would not cease now. Marcus perceived the determination in his eyes. "Very well," Marcus said. "I will assist you, but you must acquire some English first. Fundamental words." "Yes. No. Please. Thank you. You must comprehend what people are saying. You must be capable of posing inquiries." For the subsequent 2 weeks, Quay remained with Samuel's community. During daylight, Ruth and Samuel instructed him in English. Basic words, simple sentences. "Where is my wife? Have you observed this woman? I am seeking my children." His accent was pronounced, his grammar was deficient. Yet he could communicate. That sufficed. At night, Marcus visited the slave markets. He worked late repairing auction blocks, feigning concentration on his carpentry while actually examining sales records. He sought a woman named Amma and 2 children named Kofi and Adoa who had arrived from Guinea approximately 3 months previously. He located them on the 12th night. A record dated April 1851. The Charleston Belle had arrived from West Africa. Cargo, 73 enslaved Africans. Among them, one woman approximately 30 years old from the Nunes River region. 2 children, boy age 8, girl age 6, purchased by a slave trader named William Hutchins. Destination Mobile, Alabama. Marcus communicated this information to Quay the following morning. Alabama. Mobile, Alabama. That location held his family. That location marked the trail's continuation. Something loosened in Quay's chest. After 3 months of uncertainty, he finally possessed an answer. They were alive. At least they had been alive 3 months previously. That sufficed. That provided hope. However, Alabama was 500 miles distant. 500 miles of slave territory, 500 miles of plantations, patrols, and slave catchers. Quay could not simply walk there. He would be captured within a day. He was an African man barely speaking English, traveling alone through the South in 1851. He might as well wear a sign proclaiming, "Escaped slave." He required a strategy. Samuel, Ruth, and Marcus assisted him. There existed routes, secret pathways utilized by escaped slaves attempting to reach the north. The Underground Railroad, they termed it. It was not actually a railroad. It was a network of safe houses, concealed paths, and individuals willing to provide assistance. The routes typically directed northward toward freedom. However, some routes also extended southward. Slave catchers moved south, traders moved south. If one knew appropriate individuals and appropriate paths, one could travel south without capture. Ruth knew a conductor. That was the designation for individuals who guided escaped slaves along the Underground Railroad. His name was Elijah. He was an older black man who had escaped slavery in Georgia 20 years previously. He had spent the subsequent 2 decades assisting others in escape. He knew every back road, every safe house, every friendly face between South Carolina and Louisiana. If anyone could transport Quay safely to Alabama, it was Elijah. They located Elijah in a barn outside Charleston. He was concealing 3 runaways heading north to Philadelphia. When Samuel explained the situation, Elijah laughed. Not a joyful laugh, a wary laugh. Man crosses the ocean from Africa. Now he wants to proceed to Alabama, into the heart of slave country, to seek his family. He shook his head. Brother, you possess more courage than sense. Yet Elijah consented to assist. He knew individuals in Alabama, conductors, free black communities, white abolitionists who abhorred slavery. He could transport Quay safely. However, it would require time, perhaps a month, perhaps longer, and there was no guarantee Quay would locate his family upon arrival. Mobile was a substantial city. Slaves were sold and resold constantly. His wife and children could be upon any plantation within 100 miles. Quay remained indifferent to odds. He had already overcome impossible odds. He would do so again. Elijah regarded him and recognized something familiar. The same determination he had observed in every person who had escaped slavery, the same refusal to accept defeat. Very well, Elijah said. We depart tomorrow night. Pack lightly. Walk quietly. Execute precisely what I instruct. You fail to follow directions, you will cause both our deaths. They departed Charleston 2 nights later. Elijah led the way. They traveled nocturnally and slept during daylight. They avoided main roads, traversing swamps, forests, and fields. They avoided towns. They avoided white individuals. They avoided slave patrols. Elijah knew which farms possessed sympathetic owners and which would betray them. He knew which rivers could be crossed and which were too heavily monitored. He knew where to locate food and where to locate shelter. The journey to Alabama required 6 weeks. They walked nearly 500 miles. Quay's feet bled. His legs ached. He was exhausted, yet he continued moving. Every step brought him nearer to his family. They reached Mobile in early July. The city was larger than Charleston. More buildings, more people, more slaves. The slave market occupied the town center, a substantial brick structure where hundreds of individuals were bought and sold weekly. Elijah had contacts in Mobile, free black men and women residing in a settlement at the town's edge. They welcomed Quay and Elijah. They provided sustenance. They offered resting accommodation. And they communicated their knowledge concerning William Hutchins, the slave trader who had purchased Quay's family 3 months previously. Hutchins was among the largest slave traders in Alabama. He purchased slaves in Mobile and sold them to plantations throughout the state. He maintained detailed records. Everything was documented: names, ages, physical descriptions, origins, sale destinations. However, accessing those records was nearly impossible. Hutchins trusted no one. He kept the records locked in his office, and his office was within his residence, a large mansion on Mobile's north side. Breaking in would be suicide. Yet Elijah had an alternative. Hutchins employed several free black men as laborers. They loaded and unloaded cargo at the docks. They cleaned his office. They ran errands. One of them, a man named Isaiah, had worked for Hutchins for 5 years. Isaiah hated Hutchins. Everyone who worked for Hutchins hated him. However, they required income. Isaiah agreed to assist. He would sneak into Hutchins' office late at night when Hutchins slept. He would examine the records. He would discover what had transpired with Amma, Kofi, and Adoa. Isaiah required 3 nights to locate the information. On the 3rd night, he returned with answers. Amma and the 2 children had been purchased by Hutchins in April. They had been held in Mobile for 2 weeks. Then they had been sold, but not together. The children had been sold to a plantation owner named Thomas Crawford. Crawford owned a cotton plantation approximately 60 miles north of Mobile, near a town called Demopolis. Amma had been sold separately to a different owner, a man named Robert Whitfield, who owned a smaller farm near the Tombigbee River, about 40 miles northwest of Mobile. Quay felt his stomach drop. They had been separated. His children were in one location, his wife was in another. He could not rescue them simultaneously. He would have to choose. He would have to decide whom to rescue first. Elijah perceived the expression upon his face. "We will retrieve them all," Elijah said. "However, we must be intelligent. We cannot simply rush in. We require a strategy." Quay nodded. He had journeyed 4,000 miles. He had crossed an ocean. He had walked 500 miles through enemy territory. He would not fail now. He would rescue his wife. He would rescue his children. And subsequently, he would locate Captain James Crowley and ensure he paid for everything he had done. They spent the subsequent week preparing. Elijah contacted his Alabama network. There were conductors near Demopolis. There were safe houses along the Tombigbee River. There were individuals who would assist. However, rescuing 3 individuals from 2 different plantations was perilous. It would require precise timing. It would require fortune. And it would require Quay to perform actions he had never before undertaken. He would have to deceive. He would have to steal. He might have to kill. Elijah regarded him. "Are you prepared for this?" Quay contemplated his family. He considered everything they had endured. He reflected upon Captain Crowley and the slavers who had destroyed his village. "Yes," he said, "I am ready." They decided to pursue Amma first. Robert Whitfield's farm was closer than the Crawford plantation, and according to Isaiah's sources, Whitfield only possessed approximately 20 enslaved workers. Crawford had over 200. Smaller numbers meant fewer guards, fewer dogs, and superior chances of entering and exiting without capture. Elijah explained the strategy. They would approach the Whitfield farm at night. They would locate Amma. They would extract her. Then they would proceed north to Demopolis and rescue the children. Simple, except nothing about rescuing enslaved individuals from armed white men in Alabama was ever simple. They departed Mobile on a Saturday night. Elijah, Quay, and 2 other men from the free black settlement. One was named Jacob, a former field hand who had escaped from Mississippi. The other was Daniel, younger, perhaps 20 years old, who had been born free but had family still enslaved in Alabama. They traveled on foot, remaining off roads, moving through pine forests and along creek beds. The journey to Whitfield's farm required 2 days. They arrived on Monday night, just after midnight. The farm sat in a clearing surrounded by cotton fields. There was a main house, white with columns, typical plantation style. Behind it were several smaller buildings, slave quarters, a barn, a storage shed. Everything was dark except for one lamp burning in the main house. They observed from the tree line for over an hour. Elijah was counting guards, watching for dogs, checking escape routes. Finally, he turned to Quay. The quarters are behind the main house. That long building with the tin roof. That's where your wife will be. We need to enter there, locate her, and depart before anyone notices. You speak Susu. Quay nodded. Good. When we discover her, you communicate with her. You calm her, because when she perceives you, she will want to scream or cry or something loud. We cannot tolerate loud. They advanced. Jacob and Daniel remained at the tree line as lookouts. Elijah and Quay crept across the cotton field toward the slave quarters. The building was long and low, perhaps 60 feet from end to end. No windows, one door. They reached the door. Elijah tested the handle, locked. He extracted a thin piece of metal and manipulated the lock. It clicked open. They slipped inside. The odor assailed them immediately: sweat, unwashed bodies, sickness. 20 individuals were crammed into space intended for 10. They slept upon wooden platforms along both walls. Some possessed thin blankets, most did not. A few people stirred as Quay and Elijah entered, but no one spoke. In such a place, one learned not to question. Quay moved down the room's center, examining faces. Most were turned away. Some were covered by blankets. He whispered in Susu, Amma, are you here? Silence. He whispered more loudly, Amma, it's Quay. I am here. A woman at the far end of the room sat up. She was thin, thinner than Quay remembered. Her hair was cropped short. Her face bore scars that had not previously existed. Yet it was her. It was Amma. She stared at him as though he were an apparition. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Quay moved swiftly to her side. He knelt and gently placed his hand over her mouth. It is I, he said in Susu. I am real. I am here. However, you must not create noise. We are departing immediately. Amma's eyes filled with tears. She seized his face with both hands, touching his skin, confirming his reality. Then she whispered so quietly he almost could not hear. You are deceased. They said you were dead. Quay shook his head. I am not dead. I came for you. I crossed the ocean. I located you. Now we are leaving. Amma glanced around at the other enslaved individuals in the room. Some were awake now, watching. What about them? Quay felt his chest constrict. He desired to rescue everyone, but he could not. Not tonight. We cannot take everyone. Only you. Comb. They moved toward the door. Elijah was already outside, checking the path back to the tree line. Amma was weak. She had labored in the fields for 3 months, picking cotton from sunrise to sunset. Her hands were lacerated. Her back pained her, yet she moved as rapidly as possible. They were halfway across the cotton field when a dog commenced barking. Then another, then a third. Illumination appeared in the main house. Someone shouted. Run, Elijah commanded. They ran. Quay held Amma's hand, pulling her along. She stumbled, her legs unaccustomed to running. Behind them, increased shouting. The main house's front door opened. A man emerged holding a shotgun. He discharged into the air. "Halt immediately!" They did not halt. They reached the tree line. Jacob and Daniel awaited. "Go, go, go." Elijah propelled them forward into the forest. They ran through darkness, branches striking their faces, roots attempting to trip them. Behind them, additional gunshots, more shouting, dogs barking. The slave catchers were pursuing. Whitfield would dispatch men after them, possibly an entire group. Escaped slaves meant lost property. Lost property meant lost money. Men like Whitfield would hunt them for days. They ran for 3 hours continuously. Amma collapsed twice. On both occasions, Quay lifted and carried her. She was light, too light. She had not been eating adequately. No one on that plantation ate adequately. By the time the sun began to rise, they had perhaps placed 10 miles between themselves and Whitfield's farm. Elijah discovered a hiding spot, a depression in the ground surrounded by dense brush. They climbed in and covered themselves with leaves and branches. "We remain here today," Elijah whispered. "We do not move. We do not speak. We do not create any sound. Slave catchers will be searching for us. If they discover us, we perish." They lay there all day. Quay held Amma. She trembled, not from cold, but from everything, from 3 months of torment, from perceiving her husband, whom she believed dead, from fleeing for her existence. She whispered to him in Susu, "How did you locate me?" He recounted everything: the boat, the ocean crossing, Charleston Mobile, the records. She listened with closed eyes, tears streaming down her face. "The children," she whispered. "Where are Kofi and Ado?" Quay squeezed her hand. "I know their location. We are going to retrieve them. I promise." That night, they resumed movement northward toward Demopolis. Elijah estimated 4 days to reach the Crawford Plantation. 4 days of nocturnal walking, diurnal hiding, avoiding roads, avoiding people, avoiding slave catchers. Amma impeded their progress. She endeavored not to. She pushed herself as hard as possible. However, 3 months of brutal labor had depleted her completely. On the second night, she could barely walk. Quay carried her upon his back. Jacob and Daniel took turns assisting. By the 3rd night, she had improved. She had consumed some food. She had drunk clean water. Her strength was returning. They reached Demopolis on the 4th night. The town was small, perhaps 1,000 people. Half were enslaved. The Crawford Plantation was 5 miles east of town, situated on the Tombigbee River's banks. It was among the largest plantations in the area. 2,000 acres of cotton, over 200 enslaved workers, a private militia of overseers and guards. Breaking into Whitfield's farm had been hazardous. Breaking into Crawford's plantation was borderline suicidal. However, Elijah had a contact in Demopolis, a white man named Richard Hayes. Hayes was a Quaker. He abhorred slavery. He had been assisting escaped slaves for 15 years. He possessed maps of the Crawford Plantation. He knew which buildings were which. He knew where the children were kept. They met Hayes in a barn outside town. He was a thin man, perhaps 50 years old, with gray hair and wary eyes. He regarded Quay. "You are the one who crossed the ocean." It was not an inquiry. Word had disseminated. The narrative of an African man who had sailed across the Atlantic to locate his family was traveling through the underground railroad network. People found it inspiring or insane, perhaps both. Hayes spread a hand-drawn map upon the barn floor. "Crawford keeps the children separate from the adults here." He indicated a building on the plantation's east side. "It is a dormitory, perhaps 40 children, ages 5 to 12. They labor in the fields during daylight. At night, they are confined within this building. 2 guards, occasionally 3. Quay studied the map. "How do we enter?" Hayes shook his head. "You do not. Not without capture. Crawford has patrols. He has dogs. He has armed men watching every corner of that plantation. You enter there, you will not emerge. Elijah leaned forward. There must be a way. Hayes remained silent for an extended period. Then he said, there is one method, but it is hazardous. Extremely hazardous. Crawford dispatches work crews every morning. Groups of 20 or 30 slaves. They labor in different fields. If your children are within one of those crews, you could intercept them upon the road. Strike rapidly. Seize the children. Flee before the overseers can organize a response. Quay examined the map again. Which crew would contain them? Hayes indicated a location on the map. Crawford possesses a cotton field approximately 2 miles from the main plantation. He dispatches a crew there every morning, mostly children. They are small, suitable for picking cotton in confined spaces. If your children are anywhere, they are in that crew. It was not an ideal strategy. It was not even a good strategy. However, it was the sole strategy available. Quay looked at Elijah. When do we execute this? Elijah looked at Hayes. Hayes said, tomorrow morning. The crew departs at dawn. You will have perhaps a 10-minute window. After that, Crawford will dispatch every available man after you. They spent the remainder of the night preparing. Hayes supplied provisions, food, water, a pistol with 6 bullets, a knife, rope. He also provided directions to the nearest safe house. A cabin 20 miles north operated by a free black family. If they could reach that cabin, they would have a hiding place while Crawford's men searched for them. It was an improbable venture. Yet everything about this rescue was improbable. Quay examined the pistol. He had never discharged a firearm previously. Hayes demonstrated, aim, pull the trigger, attempt not to shoot yourself. Quay nodded. He hoped he would not need to employ it, but if necessary he would. They departed the barn before sunrise. Hayes guided them to a location on the road between the Crawford plantation and the cotton field. It was a narrow dirt road surrounded by trees. Good cover, good visibility. They could observe anyone approaching from either direction. They concealed themselves in the brush and waited. The sun rose. An hour passed, then another. Quay began to suspect the crew was not coming. Then he heard voices, children's voices. He looked at Elijah. Elijah nodded. That is them. The work crew materialized. Approximately 30 children walking in 2 lines, ages 5 to 12, precisely as Hayes had described. They were thin, exhausted. Most were barefoot. 2 white overseers accompanied them on horses. Both carried whips. Both possessed pistols on their belts. Quay scanned the children's faces, seeking Kofi and Adoa. Initially, he did not perceive them. Then he did, near the group's rear. Kofi was taller than Quay remembered, 8 years old now. His head was shaved. His garments were rags. Adoa was adjacent, holding his hand, 6 years old. She appeared so small, so delicate, something fractured within Quay. His children, his infants, laboring like animals. Elijah whispered, "Upon my signal." He waited until the crew was directly before them. Then he rose and discharged his pistol into the air. The horses spooked. The overseers shouted and reached for their weapons. Jacob and Daniel rushed from the brush. Jacob seized one overseer and pulled him from his horse. Daniel tackled the other. Both overseers struck the ground forcefully. The children scattered, screaming and running in every direction. Quay ran toward Kofi and Adoa. They did not recognize him initially. He was merely another adult seizing them. Kofi attempted to pull away. Quay grasped his face. "Kofi, it is I. It is Papa." Kofi's eyes widened. "Papa," his voice cracked. Quay seized both children and pulled them close. "It is I. I am here. We are departing immediately." Adoa began crying. Not fearful crying, but relief crying. Quay lifted her. She was so light, lighter than appropriate. He grasped Kofi's hand. "Run." They ran back toward the trees. Behind them, one overseer had recovered his pistol. He fired. The bullet struck a tree adjacent to Quay's head. Elijah returned fire. His shot struck the overseer in the shoulder. The man collapsed screaming. They ran into the forest. Amma was waiting there. When she perceived the children, she collapsed to her knees. Kofi and Adua observed her and began weeping.
Mama!
They ran to her. For a moment they were all together, embracing, weeping. Quay desired to remain in that moment eternally, but they did not possess eternity. They possessed perhaps 5 minutes before every armed man on the Crawford plantation pursued them. "We must depart," Elijah said. Now, they ran northward. Quay carried Adua. Amma held Kofi's hand, Jacob, and Daniel led the way. Elijah covered the rear. Behind them, they could hear shouting, dogs barking, horses. Crawford's men were coming, and they were coming rapidly. The pursuit persisted all day. Crawford dispatched at least 20 men after them. They possessed dogs, superior tracking dogs, bloodhounds capable of following scent for miles. Every time Quay believed they had escaped, he would again hear the dogs. Closer, always closer. By mid-afternoon, they were exhausted. The children could run no further. Amma limped. Even Quay was slowing. They required a strategy, something to divert the dogs from their trail. Elijah had an idea. Water. We need to enter water. Dogs cannot track through water. There was a creek approximately 1 mile ahead. If they could reach it, they could follow it downstream and lose the dogs. Perhaps. They reached the creek 20 minutes later. It was shallow, perhaps 2 feet deep, moving swiftly over rocks. They entered. The water was cold. Adua gasped. Quay held her close. "It is acceptable, infant. We are acceptable." They moved downstream as rapidly as possible. The water impeded their progress, but it would also impede the dogs. Behind them, the barking diminished, then ceased. Elijah smiled. "It is functioning. Continue moving." They followed the creek for 3 miles. Then they emerged and ran through the forest for another 2 miles. By the time the sun began to set, they had placed substantial distance between themselves and Crawford's men. They located the safe house just after dark. It was a small cabin in profound isolation, occupied by a free black family. Husband, wife, and teenage son. They had been assisting escaped slaves for years. They observed the group approaching and immediately opened the door. "Enter quickly." The cabin was small, 1 room, a fireplace, a few furniture pieces. Yet it was warm, it was safe. The family provided food. Cornbread, beans, water. Quay's family consumed as though they had never witnessed food previously. Because for 3 months, they had not witnessed genuine food. Only scraps, only sufficient to maintain existence and labor. The cabin's female occupant examined Amma's scarred face and damaged hands. She uttered nothing. She simply produced clean cloth and water and commenced cleansing Amma's wounds. The man conversed with Elijah. "Crawford will be searching for you. He will examine every farm, every cabin, every hiding spot within 50 miles. You may remain here tonight, but tomorrow you must continue moving northward. Distance yourselves as far from Alabama as possible." That night, Quay sat with his family. They were together for the first time since the raid upon their village. All together. Kofi and Adua had numerous inquiries. "How did you locate us, Papa? How did you arrive here? Are we returning home?" Quay responded as best he could. He recounted the boat, the ocean, the journey through South Carolina. He simplified, rendering it less terrible than reality. He omitted the starvation, the hallucinations, the moments he anticipated death. They required no knowledge of that. They had endured sufficiently. Amma sat quietly holding Adua. She had spoken little since the rescue. Finally, she spoke. "What now?" Quay regarded her. "We proceed northward. We locate a place where we are safe. Somewhere they cannot discover us." Amma shook her head. "They will always discover us. You recognize this?" As long as slavery exists, we will never be safe. They will hunt us eternally. She was accurate. Quay recognized her accuracy. Even if they reached the north, slave catchers existed there as well. The Fugitive Slave Act meant escaped slaves could be captured and returned to their owners anywhere in the nation. There was no genuine safety, not in America. Yet Quay possessed another consideration, something that had been developing in his mind since departing Africa. Then we depart America, he said. We proceed to Canada. I have heard people discuss it. Canada lacks slavery. It is free. We go there. Elijah, seated nearby, nodded. He is accurate. Canada is the sole genuine option. It is an extensive journey, perhaps 1,000 miles. However, there are routes, safe houses, individuals who will assist. You could succeed. Amma regarded her children, then Quay. 1,000 miles. Quay took her hand. I crossed an ocean. We can cross 1,000 miles. They rested that night, genuine rest. For the first time in months, Amma and the children slept without fear. Quay remained awake. He sat by the window, observing the darkness, ensuring no one approached. Around midnight, Elijah joined him. You accomplished it, Elijah said. You located them. You extracted them. That is incredible. Quay nodded but did not smile. It is not finished. Not until we are safe. Not until we are free. Elijah was silent for a moment. Then he said, What about Crowley, the captain of the slave ship? You mentioned you wanted him to pay. Quay had contemplated Captain James Crowley daily since departing Africa. The man who had ordered the raid upon his village. The man who had chained his family and sold them like cattle. Quay desired vengeance. He wanted to locate Crowley and terminate him. However, now, seated in this cabin with his family sleeping nearby, he recognized something. Vengeance would alter nothing. Killing Crowley would not undo what had transpired. It would not heal Amma's scars. It would not restore Kofi and Adoa's childhood. The optimal vengeance was survival. The optimal vengeance was reaching Canada and living freely. Perhaps later, he said. Currently, I must focus upon my family. Elijah nodded. Intelligent choice. Yet Quay was not entirely truthful. He was not abandoning vengeance. He was merely deferring it. Someday, when his family was secure, when they were established in Canada, when the children were older and stronger, then he would return. He would locate Captain James Crowley and ensure he answered for everything he had done. They departed the cabin the following morning. The family supplied provisions for the journey. Food, water, directions to the next safe house. Elijah was returning to South Carolina. He had other individuals to assist, other families to rescue. He shook Quay's hand. You are a good man, Elijah said. Most individuals would not have done what you did. Most would have accepted it and continued. But you did not. You fought. You prevailed. Do not forget that. Quay embraced him. Thank you for everything. The journey northward required 3 months. They traveled nocturnally and hid during daylight. They traversed Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio. They utilized the Underground Railroad, moving from safe house to safe house. Some houses were operated by free black families. Some were operated by white abolitionists. Some were operated by formerly enslaved individuals who had attained freedom and now dedicated their existence to assisting others. Every person they encountered possessed a narrative. Every person had lost something to slavery. Yet they were all resisting in their own manner. The children strengthened during the journey. Kofi began smiling again. Adoa commenced speaking more. Amma's wounds healed. Her body recovered. However, there were scars that would not heal, mental scars, emotional scars. She awoke screaming some nights. She flinched upon hearing loud noises. She sometimes could not tolerate being touched. Quay understood. He possessed his own scars, his own nightmares. Yet they were together. That was what mattered. They crossed into Canada in October 1851, 7 months after the raid upon their village, 7 months after Quay had stood upon an African beach and resolved to accomplish the impossible. They arrived in a town called St. Catharines, a settlement where numerous escaped slaves had constructed new existences. The inhabitants welcomed them. They provided accommodation. They assisted in locating employment. Quay obtained work as a fisherman. Amma labored as a seamstress. The children attended school, genuine school. They learned to read and write for the first time. For 7 months, they felt safe. They possessed a house, small, yet theirs. They possessed food. They possessed freedom. Kofi befriended other children in the settlement. Adua acquired English. She still spoke Susu at home with her parents, yet she was adapting. They all were. One evening approximately a year after their Canadian arrival, Amma and Quay sat outside their dwelling observing the sunset. Amma inquired, "Do you ever contemplate returning?" Quay understood her meaning. Returning to Africa, to their village, to the existence they had previously known. "Sometimes," he said. "However, that existence is gone. Our village is gone. Everyone we knew is deceased or scattered. This is our existence now, here in Canada with our children." Amma nodded. She had been contemplating similarly. What about Crowley? Quay remained silent. He had contemplated Crowley extensively over the preceding year. The rage persisted. The desire for vengeance remained. Yet it was quieter now, less urgent. "Some day," he said. "But not today. Today I am with my family. That suffices." Yet 3 years later, in 1854, Quay received intelligence that altered everything. A vessel had docked in Montreal, a former slave ship that had been seized by the British Navy and converted to merchant use. The captain was vending goods in the port. His name was James Crowley, the same Crowley, the identical man who had raided Quay's village, the same man who had stolen his family. He was in Canada, merely 200 miles distant. Quay informed Amma he had business in Montreal. She understood the nature of that business. She did not attempt to prevent him. She comprehended. Some debts require settlement. Quay traveled to Montreal alone. The journey required 4 days. He located Crowley's vessel docked in the port. He observed it for 2 days. Learning Crowley's routine, every evening, Crowley departed the ship and visited a tavern near the docks. He drank. He gambled. He spoke loudly about his glory days as a slave ship captain. He boasted about the fortunes he had amassed, the thousands of Africans he had transported. He laughed about it. On the 3rd night, Quay followed Crowley when he left the tavern. It was late. The streets were empty. Crowley was intoxicated, stumbling down an alley toward the docks. Quay stepped from the shadows. Crowley halted. He regarded Quay. He did not recognize him. Why would he? Quay was merely another African man, merely another face in a sea of faces Crowley had destroyed. "Remove yourself from my path," Crowley said. Quay did not move. He spoke in English. His English was proficient now. 3 years in Canada had taught him well. "My name is Quay," he said. 3 years ago, you raided my village on the Nunes River in Guinea. You killed my neighbors. You took my wife and children. You sold them in Charleston." Crowley's expression transformed. Confusion initially, then recognition, then fear. He reached for a knife on his belt. Quay was swifter. He seized Crowley's wrist and twisted. The knife descended to the ground. Quay retrieved it. "You destroyed my existence," Quay said. "You took everything from me. Do you remember? Or am I merely another nameless African to you?" Crowley attempted to pull away. "I was merely conducting business. It was not personal." Quay laughed, a cold laugh. "Not personal. You incinerated my village. You chained my children. You sold my wife like cattle. And it was not personal." He pressed the blade against Crowley's throat. "I crossed an ocean to locate them. Did you know that? I constructed a vessel and sailed 4,000 miles. I walked 500 miles through slave territory. I risked my existence 100 times. All because of what you did, and you claim it was not personal. Crowley trembled. Please. I am sorry. I will provide money. I will. Quay increased pressure on the blade. A thin line of blood appeared upon Crowley's neck. I do not desire your money. I desire you to know. I desire you to comprehend. You did not prevail. You did not fracture us. We survived. We are free, and you will never harm another family again. He could have terminated Crowley at that moment. It would have been simple. One swift motion, and it would conclude. Yet Quay hesitated. He contemplated his family, Kofi and Adoa, the existence they were constructing in St. Catherine's, the man he aspired to become. He lowered the blade. I am not going to kill you, he said, because I am not like you. However, I desire you to exist with this. I desire you to know that one of the thousands of individuals you destroyed returned. I desire you to know that I prevailed. He discarded the knife and walked away. Crowley collapsed against the wall, gasping. Quay did not look back. He traversed the Montreal streets through darkness toward home, toward his family, toward the existence he had fought so diligently to construct. He had crossed an ocean. He had rescued his family. He had confronted the man who destroyed his world. And he had chosen mercy over vengeance. Because ultimately, the optimal vengeance was not violence. It was survival. It was freedom. It was love. And Quay possessed all three.